In this video, we're going to talk about seedless vascular plants. So let's talk about some general characteristics of seedless vascular plants. So first of all, the sporophyte part of the alternation of generations is going to be the more dominant part of the life cycle. And by dominant, we just mean the more noticeable, the more conspicuous. Remember with seedless non-vascular plants, the bryophytes, the gametophyte generation is the more dominant part of the life cycle. But in all other plants, the sporophyte is the more dominant generation. Seedless vascular plants are still required to be near water for reproductive purposes, just like the seedless non-vascular plants. And that's because the male gamete has to be able to swim to the female gamete. And you can see that the seedless vascular plants are represented in a couple of different phyla and classes. So there's phylum Lycophyta, which are the club mosses, and then there's phylum Monolophyta, which includes the horsetails, whisk ferns, and true ferns, and we'll talk about each of these in more detail on the following slides. So first let's take a look at phylum Lycophyta. The vascular seedless plants in phylum Lycophyta represent the earliest group of seedless vascular plants that exist. They are small evergreen plants with a stem and microphyls. And remember that a microphyll is a small leaf that has a single vein running through it. And the organisms in phylum Lycophyta are also known as the club mosses, not to be confused with the true mosses, which are in phylum Bryophyta. And the true mosses in phylum Bryophyta are seedless non-vascular plants. Now we'll talk about phylum Monolophyta. There are three classes associated with phylum Monolophyta. And remember that we're just talking about these levels of classification. So remember we're talking about plants in domain, eukarya, supergroup, Archaeplastida, kingdom, Plantae, phylum, Monolophyta, and then the next level of classification is the class level. And so these are the three classes that are kind of under this phylum of Monolophyta. So on the following slides, we'll talk more about horsetails, whisk ferns, and true ferns. So first we'll take a look at the horsetails. And if you look at the name of the class, equi should make you think of equine, which is related to horses. So the scientific name is related to the common name of horsetails. And horsetails are typically located in damp environments and marshes. When I lived in Florida, we had horsetails all over the yard. They were everywhere in Florida. You can see from this picture that the stem has these kind of joints or nodes. And then they have these needle-shaped leaves and branches that kind of extend from those nodes in these whorls. Since the leaves are needle-like, there's not a lot of surface area, but you'll notice that the stem is green. So photosynthesis actually primarily occurs in the stem, which is green. So the cells in the stem here have chloroplast and those pigments needed for photosynthesis. Horsetails are also known for this kind of crystalline element known as silica. And silica helps to kind of provide a kind of a tough, rigid structure to the horsetails. And these have actually been used as scrub brushes in the past because they are very stiff and have that silica in them that provides them with this kind of roughness. Continuing our discussion of the horsetails, they do have rhizomes, which are these underground type stems that help to anchor the plant in place. They also have the spores of horsetails are also really interesting because they're attached to these things called elaters. And you can kind of see them on the picture here. And this screenshot down below, this is actually a video that I can't play here, but I will post it on the course site because it actually shows these elaters in action. Because what happens is that the elaters can actually kind of change their shape based on how humid it is. So they act as almost like little propellers to help the spores to disperse when it's humid enough out for them to hopefully find a kind of a wet place to land to germinate. When the spores germinate, they develop into bisexual gametophytes. And bisexual just means that it has both male and female reproductive parts on the same plant. Horsetails are also homosporous, which means that the spores that they produce are similar in their kind of size and shape. An organism that's heterosporous is going to have kind of different size-shaped spores that it produces. So it basically has like a bigger kind of megaspore and a smaller microspore. But in the case of horsetails, because they are homosporous, all of their spores are similar. The whisk ferns do not have true roots and leaves. It is believed that at one point in their evolutionary history, they did have roots and leaves, but then a de-evolution occurred and they actually lost those structures. Photosynthesis occurs in the green stems, and you can see on the picture here that there are these sporangia that form at the tips of the branches. And these sporangia is where the spores are contained and released. When the spores are released and germinate, they develop into small gametophytes. Now we're going to talk about the true ferns, which are the most advanced seedless plant. They are found in tropical and temperate forests and really anywhere where there are wet, moist environments primarily. The stem may be partially above ground, forming a trunk, or this part of the stem can be buried to form a rhizome, and then roots grow from the rhizome in order to absorb water and nutrients from the soil. Like all plants except for the seedless non-vascular plants, true ferns have the sporophyte as the dominant stage of their life cycle. And remember, the sporophyte is the multicellular, diploid stage. And the fronds of a true fern are large with compound leaves, and these leaves serve a dual purpose. So the leaves are the site of photosynthesis, but they also contain the reproductive organs because these leaves are sporophylls, which we talked about on a different slide. But remember that sporophylls contain sporangia, which in this case are on the underside of the fronds, and those sporangia release spores. One kind of interesting structure associated with true ferns are these things called croziers, which are also called fiddleheads. And you can see that on this picture here. And it's the tip of a developing fern frond. So as the frond is developing, it will kind of unwind or unfurl, and you'll see the leaves start to kind of branch out from there. And it's really interesting because these are actually edible. And when I lived in Alaska, it was really popular that restaurants would actually advertise when it was fiddlehead fern season. And so people would actually go out and collect the fiddleheads and cook them and serve them at restaurants. And I'm sure you could eat them at home as well. I never got a chance to try them, but I just thought it was interesting that they would advertise that that the fiddleheads were in season. And they're called fiddleheads because it looks like the kind of the scroll at the end of a violin, which is a fiddle.